All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for being here. Welcome to the second webinar in our series on AI for institutional transformation. We're really excited today to talk about how you all can move beyond thinking about just how should we use AI into how ready are we to use AI at your institution. Our hope is to give you some materials and some tools that you can leave with to make you feel more prepared as you go into these critical decisions around adopting AI at your institution, your system, or even within a department. So I am excited to welcome our guest today. My name is Audrey Ellis. I'm the founder of T3 Advisory. We are a small consulting practice focused on helping access-oriented institutions and the organizations that serve those institutions in higher ed, really focusing on student success and achieving our shared mission by focusing on improving process improvement, technology, data, with the end goal of increasing our student outcomes. And I want to hand it over to introduce out my incredible colleague, Mohammed Obidat. He is the Deputy CIO of AI and ERP at the Alabama Community College System. He's been a wonderful thought partner and collaborator with us at T3. Mo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Adri. Yes. Again, I'm Mohammed Obaidad, Deputy CIO for ERP and AI at the Alabama Community College System. I have over 25 years of in higher ed IT leadership and now focus on advancing AI across 24 colleges at the system level in practical and responsible ways. I'm excited to share our journey and look forward to our conversation today.
Thanks, Mo. And so just a little bit of housekeeping for us. We are recording this session. And so for anyone who wants to kind of recap or view the session later, we have a new YouTube channel where you can access these. I feel like I should point and be like and subscribe here. But in reality, you'll be able to access the recording on YouTube, and we'll send it out to everyone who's registered for this webinar. You'll also be able to find our slides, which we will share out in email. The webinar also lives on our website with all of our content, where we publish all of our new and publicly available resources and tools around AI. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. We also have a Q&A panel, so if you have specific questions, you can add those actually right into the webinar chat. And so excited to be able to hopefully have you all interact live with us. There's both a Q&A and a chat, so feel free to drop comments in if there are things that you're doing at your institution that you want to share, and we can keep the conversation going. Hopefully this can be interactive. And lastly, like I said, we will send out those slides and follow up. And so don't feel like you have to scramble to write everything down. We'll do our best to make sure that you get everything as we close out today. So I wanted to give a little background about this research project. T3 was lucky and grateful to be funded by the Gates Foundation to conduct a national landscape study of AI adoption in higher ed. We conducted this study in collaboration with Complete College America and Learn Consulting. We really wanted to understand what I like to think of as kind of a dual path or a fork in a road. We in higher ed, and I would argue in any industry, are kind of on this dual journey of trying to understand what does AI mean from a tactical, incremental change standpoint. In other words, how is AI changing our day-to-day right now? But we also are forced or hopefully thinking about what AI might mean for the transformation of our work in the future. How is our industry going to respond to this technology that is so ubiquitous and can be applied in so many contexts within our work? And so through this study, we sought to understand this specific question. How can artificial intelligence advance institutional transformation in higher education that leads to better and more equitable student outcomes? And all of the research that we're presenting in this series of webinars comes from this study because everything is public goods. It's licensed by the Creative Commons, and so folks are able to borrow and adapt as long as they cite the research. And so we really hope that this will give folks a launch pad to think about what AI might mean for them in many different contexts of your work. And want to give just a really brief overview of what we found in our research. We interviewed 33 institutions, and while we have, I would say, hundreds of takeaways from the study, the four that I want to call out today are that we're seeing experimentation happening almost everywhere, but it's uneven. At this point, we're not stuck in the kind of bury our head in the sand moment around AI anymore. We see that most institutions have at least pockets of innovation or experimentation around AI. But within those same institutions, it's commonplace to find many other pockets that have not yet begun to consider what AI might mean for their campus. We also see that that innovation and experimentation is not coordinated. It is oftentimes the opposite of strategic and coordinated. Like I said, it's happening in pockets. And so kind of taking that like let a thousand flowers bloom approach rather than looking at AI adoption from a holistic standpoint and thinking about where the most strategic opportunities for AI might be. We also have seen that while there are certainly barriers to entry or barriers to access around AI, especially given the cost that AI platforms can entail, the use of AI and the strategic approach to AI integration is not entirely an access problem. Individuals are using and getting into the tools that are freely available, perhaps procured by their institution. But rather, we're seeing that the barriers to AI strategic integration at institutions and primarily access-oriented institutions are coordination, governance, capacity, and training. And so these are actually not technical challenges around the technology itself. These are operational and organizational challenges that do require strategy and do require leadership. So that leads us to thinking about this challenge of readiness. And so we see that because institutions are facing enormous pressure to do something, honestly, like anything with AI, that pressure is often resulting and leading institutions to conduct these disconnected pilots or take a reactive approach to purchasing. And so this is where we really see the opportunity for a moment of diagnosis to better position senior leaders to approach this moment with intent and strategy so that you don't end up in a place of scattered investments that make it difficult to evaluate what's working. And we really want to make the case today for taking a moment to assess and plan your readiness through kind of a four-step process of diagnose, prioritize, invest, and scale. And if you attended our first webinar, this is kind of a subsection of our broader strategy around the continuous improvement cycle surrounded by governance that we recommend institutions take as an approach to AI integration. So today we're not going to be going deep into what your exact AI strategy should be at your institution because AI is such a ubiquitous technology. Our hope is to focus more on what this moment of diagnostic analysis or what this moment of diagnosis can position you to do better as you then make your strategy. And so rather than just launching into a strategy, we believe that if you take a moment to pause and diagnose, you'll be better poised to create a responsive strategy for your mission and your institution's needs. So, if you know me at all, you might know that I love making sure that you have something actionable and something that you can take away from our work. And so, we have three goals for you today. The first is for you to understand and know how to access and understand kind of the components of our AI adoption rubric, which is like the quick and dirty way to think about your institution's AI readiness. The second is that you will understand the survey suite that we have developed, which is customizable and editable for the field and also free. And so that you can start to envision how you might leverage all or a portion of the surveys to help conduct this diagnosis at your institution. And then finally, we hope that you'll take some time during our session today to think about what one or two actions might be that you would like to take based on what your diagnosis tells you about your institution. Um, and I want to talk a little bit more in depth about what this readiness model actually entails. And the reason for this is that when we conducted interviews, whenever I talked to any institutional leader about AI adoption, I often find that we're stuck in a pattern of recency bias. So that means like whatever is most top of mind for that person is what they bring up when they talk about AI. If they recently had a leadership email sent out to the college around AI, they might really focus on their readiness as it pertains to leadership. If they recently are dealing with budget appropriations at the state level, that might be the thing that comes to mind. But in our change management research at T3, in our research around AI adoption, we know that AI readiness requires an entire set of competencies or dimensions. And these five dimensions are outlined here on our slide and also in our AI adoption rubric. And what we argue and what we've seen throughout our research is that institutions that are the farthest along with strategic integration of AI adoption are more advanced in all five of these dimensions, not just a smattering of them. And that's important because if you think of this in practice, you could have leadership support, adoption coordination, policy development, but if you don't have resource commitment or technology deployment, you're not going to make it very far with AI. And generally, this rule applies no matter which handful of these dimensions you select. And so, as we think about these five categories in the rubric, I want to encourage you to think about your own institution and your frame of reference and where your institution might place on this on a spectrum as it relates to these five categories. And so, like any rubric, we have created a table, and while we have on one axis the five dimensions, the other axis spells out these three categories of this continuum of adoption. So, how advanced your institution is as it pertains to each of those categories or dimensions. That first level of the spectrum being experimental and emerging. So for institutions that when we kind of look across the rubric are in this experimental and emerging category, we primarily see institutions that are taking that more individual effort approach with ad hoc coordination, limited policies, and no or very limited dedicated funding. On the other end of the spectrum, the institutions that we have seen that are in that transforming category tend to have that more comprehensive approach to integration. Their leadership team is thinking strategically about what AI means in all of their institutional domains or functional areas. They're thinking about how to embed AI into operations, and they often and most likely have a full policy that they have rolled out, whatever that policy entails for their institutional context. And so the purpose of this rubric is not to have you kind of label your institution or make you feel behind. Someone said recently, I was at the Ask You AI symposium, and someone said, actually, I think it was Dr. Terry Brown, wherever you are is where you are meant to be. I think we all need to approach this moment without shame or stigma, but also open-mindedness and awareness about where we are. And so the goal is to help you now choose the right next move based on where you are in this continuum, rather than trying to kind of leapfrog from experimental to transforming. You could instead kind of take a more incremental step, which might be more easily received by our institution and also more realistic to tackle. So, my colleague Daniel, who's on the chat, is on the Zoom as well, is going to drop a link in the chat to our AI adoption rubric. This is available on our website. Thanks, Daniel. And this is something that we would really encourage you to take back to your teams as a discussion resource. I've seen really fruitful conversations come from taking this rubric to, let's say, a cabinet meeting or an IT meeting or a shared governance conversation, and asking folks in different domains at the college to see how everyone scores your institution and where there might be some divergence on how you all think that you or where you all land as far as your adoption goes. And the goal here is to help you think not just about every possible next step that you might need to take, but what is one of the biggest next steps that you can take. And so let's say that you are really far along in most areas, but you realize that you're really lagging in perhaps uh, adoption coordination. That might give you a clue that adoption coordination is an area where your next step would have the highest value or have the highest impact for you to focus on. And so we want to encourage you to take the rubric back to, like I said, a small team and think about bringing in a cross-functional group, going through that calibration exercise, so self-scoring, and then rating your institution on the continuum and seeing where you each rate your institution. Then creating some space to discuss where those tensions might be or disagreements around how you might progress. This exercise can really help bring forward areas that, if you were to do this exercise alone, would be uncoordinated. And the rubric provides, like I said, a really low barrier to entry for this conversation. Our hope is that you're able to create some shared language, think about kind of what the full spectrum of the competencies or dimensions might be, and then think about where you all want to focus next. But it doesn't need to be the only way, like I said, that you focus on your AI adoption dimension. So I want to ask you all, which dimension is least clear for you on your campus right now? I would love to ask you to drop in the chat, if you could please select which of the five dimensions. I see policy development. Thanks, Tim. If others wouldn't mind posting in the chat as well, which dimension they see. Adoption, coordination, policy, adoption. Hi, Gwen. Good to see you in here. All right. Great. Well, we'll move on, but if you have not dropped in the chat yet, which of these dimensions, and I see Shonda, the training specifically being an important point to call out. Good to see you in here as well. This is an area where I think, no doubt, this group relates in terms of being a common thread, but also that is really resonating with what we saw in our research. And so hopefully the survey tool will provide you a much more robust perspective on what adoption currently looks like at your institution. So the reason that I and I'm realizing, and thank you, Jess, for putting this in the chat. It looks like folks can't see what others are putting into the chat. And so we have a handful of folks saying adoption coordination, a handful saying policy development. And so as far as adoption, especially adoption coordination goes, the reason that I really think that these surveys can be such an asset to you all in this moment is that it's not like you haven't rolled out any AI on your campus, and we can be confident in this moment, 3+ years after the introduction of ChatGPT, that no one has ever used AI. Whether or not your adoption of AI is coordinated does not mean that it has not been introduced at your college in some way, shape, or form. I just used like three double negatives. So to make that a little bit clearer, what I'm trying to say is that most likely you have folks using AI on your campus in many different ways, some that may be approved and some that are what might be considered shadow AI use. And so to now attempt to coordinate what you don't understand is a challenging endeavor for any institution or any leader. And so this survey suite that we've created is meant to give you a much more detailed level of visibility into the different levels of your institution. And this can be deployed at a system level, which we'll talk about with Mo, but it can also be deployed at an institutional level or even in a division or department if that's the domain that you have kind of oversight or control over. So the idea here is that not any single person has the full picture, and so to conduct this survey suite should hopefully give you a much deeper perspective into what's happening on campus. There's multiple ways that you can think about rolling out this survey pack. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what this entails, um, I believe that this could be done as either a sprint or as kind of a full-blown assessment at your institution. And I just want to caveat this with the fact that I used to be the director of institutional effectiveness at a community college, and I understand that survey fatigue is a very real challenge on campus. And so that's why I want to encourage you to think creatively about when and how you could deploy a survey suite like this or a survey tool. So let's say, for example, that you only have the ability to roll out one of the surveys, great. Or you could pick and choose questions from the surveys, and even that would give you a little bit more of an idea of what is happening on your campus. If you have an existing survey that you are planning on launching, you could embed survey questions into that existing survey rather than launch two surveys that are in competition with another. There's a whole range of ways that you can think strategically about rolling this out, but I would encourage you to find some way to get these questions out to your broader community, especially because in higher ed we are decentralized. It's challenging to gather and really learn about this information from ourselves. And so the survey suite itself is broken out into four categories. So the first survey is targeted at executive leaders. If you are at a system level, you could roll this out with just your presidents. If you are at an institutional level, you could roll it out with your cabinet, let's say. The focus is a little bit different for each of these, and then taken together, it can give you a better perspective into the ways that each of these individual stakeholder groups inform your adoption rubric. The second group is your department leaders or supervisors, even. So, individuals who, in the void of an AI strategy from the top, may have gone ahead and created their own. With the kind of trend with AI washing, where current vendors that did not previously have AI are introducing AI features into their platforms, it's highly likely that, let's say, a director of advising at an institution with no AI policy has had to roll out their own kind of departmental AI policy if your institution does not have one. So we want to understand not just what their policy is, but also what's their attitude and approach to AI? How are they talking about this tool with with their team and their direct reports? The next level is your individual stakeholders. So this survey can be rolled out to the entire college. This is something the president could answer. This is something that a faculty, staff, advisor, frontline staff member could fill out. And it's really how do you, in your day-to-day work, view AI and how are you using it? How do you understand how we've rolled it out so far? And a variety of questions of that nature. And then, very importantly, our final survey is focused on the students at your institution and how they are receiving and interpreting AI guidance, let's say in the classroom, how they perceive AI in terms of how accessible they feel it is from a cost standpoint, how the college is framing it to them, and also what they believe to be the opportunities are. And so, taken together, these four surveys can give you a real landscape understanding of your institution. It can tell you where you need to invest more in terms of communication, where you need to invest more in terms of capacity, and also what kinds of governance you might need to provide more clarity around. And so I'm really excited to talk a little bit now about our work with the Alabama Community College System, where we are underway. We are in the middle of this diagnosis or diagnostic, and so really excited to talk about it and thank Mo for being here. And before I hand it over to him, I just want to give a really high level overview of the project, just to kind of frame out what he's going to be describing. And so T3 is working with the Alabama Community College System to develop a system-wide AI adoption framework that balances consistency with institutional flexibility across their 24 colleges, also including the ATN and ACCS, which are kind of agencies within their system organization. The goal is to build a shared vision through change management practices, bring along the various stakeholder groups, identify opportunities for risks and capacity needs. We are looking to develop and support them with their governance strategy and their communication structures. We are developing a phased implementation roadmap, and ultimately, we want to make them feel confident about their approach to AI adoption and their AI strategy. And so these surveys are playing a big role, and we are partway through our administration of them. And so I want to hand it over to my team member, Mo, to talk a little bit more.
And glad, Reggie. So, as you mentioned, at the system level, we serve 24 colleges plus the system office and another entity called ATN, Alabama Training Network. So we cannot rely only on one-on-one conversation to understand what's happening across the whole system. That's why surveys will help us hear from all colleges at the same time and give us consistent information we can compare and learn from. Surveys also make sure every college has a chance to be heard, and it's not limited to who's in the room and who's reaching out to us. Every college has a voice. This also strengthens our decision making. Instead of relying on isolated examples or perceptions, we are able to point to evidence to reflect system-wide input. Ultimately, surveys will help us move from what we are hearing to what the system is telling us. That shift is essential to making credible system-level decisions. Next slide. So here I will explore the listening at scale, how system deals with money realities. When people say the system, they are often talking about or thinking about colleges that they hear from the most. But in our system, it included 25 or 26 institutions, actually, 24 colleges plus the system office and ATN. And each one of those have a different reality. So listening at scale help us hear beyond just the loudest voices survey ensure we are not just hearing from handful of colleges, but from the entire system. This means that every college gets a voice, not just those that have they are most visible or most vocal. It also help us see differences between colleges. Colleges have different needs, and that allow us to offer support that actually fits those colleges. And finally, this helps us with fairness. Without system-wide input, it's not easy to treat one college's experience as everyone's. Surveys help us avoid that and make it better, more balanced decisions. Next slide, please. Now, this slide shows the common problem we call the permission gap. So leaders think they are encouraging people to try new things. And they say, we believe we are giving permission. But on the other hand, many faculty and staff don't feel that way. They are not sure what is allowed. They are worried about making mistake. And that difference creates a gap. Because of that gap, progress is slowing down, people hesitate, some work happens quietly, things are not done the same way everywhere. Surveys help us see that clearly. They give people a safe way to say, I'm not sure what's okay. So once we see that gap, we can fix it. We can explain what's allowed, what's not allowed, and who to ask for help. And the goal is simple, less confusion and more confidence to move forward. The next topic we will talk about here, how we build the trust through champions. So change works better when it comes from peers, not just from the top. People trust people they work with. That's why champions matter. Peer credibility moves faster than top-down messages. And surveys help us find champions across colleges and across roles. Not just leaders, faculty, staff, and others who are trusted by their peers. Once we find those champions, we support them, give them structure, clear messages, and a way to connect with each other so work can grow. This also builds ownership. When people are a part of the change, they resist less, they feel invested, and that's the key point. The surveys is not the end, it's the starting point, and it's how we begin to build shared effort across the system.
Thanks, Mo. And Mo has done a really fantastic job of thinking about the role of champions at ACCS. And so I just want to be abundantly clear. And Daniel, if you could drop the link to the surveys in the chat, these are all things that you can take if you have Qualtrics, if you have SurveyMonkey, Wufoo, whatever tool you use, you can take these. There are editable Word documents throughout the PDF that you can download and modify. And so we've taken this template that you all will have access to, and we've really customized it to the ACCS project. That means we've added questions around, the survey is anonymous, but are you willing to be a champion? If you would like to volunteer to kind of become a champion, folks are able to they're able to volunteer. And we've already created a really fantastic list of champions that we're now able to kind of build this growing pool of names that aren't just like if word of mouth snowball sampling, like one person who recommends the next who recommends the next. It's giving people in a distributed way across the entire set of institutions the opportunity to volunteer and become kind of step up into this champion role with their AI work at ACCS.
And Andre might add, because I want to give credit to the world champions, to my boss. He's the senior vice chancellor for IT. And when we talked about governance, I was really did not want the system level is looked at as a compliance office controlling, and we did not want to control innovation. So we were thinking about how can we call that group, or how we will, instead of governance group, what we can call it to allow innovation and not to create some level of control or to make it as a compliance group. And he came up with the Champions Council or group of champions.
I skipped ahead there on our slides. Thanks, Mo. And so do you want to talk a little bit about the Champion Council and your vision for it, or shall we save that for a future webinar?
We can say, I can just mention, I've envisioned the Champion Council to be like the shark attacking the shark, the people that in the TV show where they go to present ideas to be funded.
Oh, Shark Tank.
Shark
Yes.
Tank. So I'm envisioning that the Champion Council to be where they have a lot of maybe funding that they will be able to support ideas across the system that can be scaled and supported. So people will come in, will be encouraged to come and present pilot efforts or what they think that will work, and get the Champion Council to support that. So that's one idea about the Champion Council that I'm thinking. In addition to sharing ideas and being able to move stuff faster than if they depend on the system office to be the one control or coordinating that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mo. And so the Champion Council is exciting. It's really taking shape with the work that we've been doing. And as we roll out this next couple of surveys in a couple of weeks, actually, I'm really excited to see. Hopefully, we'll get a number of additional volunteers for the Champion survey. And so the point of these surveys is not just to collect data. I think I really kind of like hit, what do you say? Beat the dead horse here, but I'm going to just do it one more time. It's not just to give you data for no reason. They are meant to kind of backwards map to the rubric. So every survey has sections of that survey that pertain to the 5 dimensions in the rubric, which should allow you to relatively quickly analyze your results from the surveys and then essentially come like create an output that shows you where your institution is um, incorporating many, many voices, not just maybe those in a cabinet level discussion who you could talk about the rubric with. And it really breaks down the subcomponents of each of the cells of the rubric to help, come up with your AI readiness score. And the goal is that then you can take action. And importantly, because the survey collects things like what division are you in or what unit are you in, and depending on your institution, you can make that as customized as you want. If you want to keep it really anonymous, you can. If you want to get more granular, you can change that. But the idea is you could even then drill down into different areas to see perhaps where those pockets of innovation are, where you might have kind of areas that would benefit from more AI exploration or support. And that should help you then figure out what your actions should be. And so instead of taking that kind of reactive, sometimes responsive approach to AI, where we have a board member pull aside a president at a conference and say, why aren't we doing this thing around AI? Or you have a VP who's sitting at in a vendor expo at a conference calling up their team and saying, I saw this cool demo, we should get this platform. You're in a different position when you can see the landscape, the lay of the land at your institution, and where the pockets of AI is happening and where there's potentially a lot of opportunity for growth and also really potentially exciting use cases that we would argue that that is where you will find the ROI, not in the areas that kind of vendors are thinking about presenting you with, but rather you taking the time to think, pre going earlier in the process before the procurement request ever makes it to your procurement team to deciding where should we even be looking for tools to procure. And that's where we want to encourage you to think. And so we would encourage you, and we're happy to collaborate. We work with ACCS to develop kind of a current state of readiness report, um, helping them think through what their priorities are, and then thinking through what that sequence might look like of tasks that are actionable, but also feasible and realistic for their institutional context or their system context. And so, I want to encourage you to think again, not just about what the data tells you, but also how you would act on that data. And some of the first moves that we might consider recommending from what we've seen throughout our data is to think about who has the right to make what types of decisions and clarifying that aspect of your governance. Coming up with some sort of minimum policy or guidelines for safe experimentation if you don't have that already. Um, Defining roles for training. We're going to get into this in our next webinar, which I'll talk about, but thinking about all of the stakeholder groups at your college and not just faculty from a training standpoint. Thinking about not only what tools you have and how individuals may or may not be able to access them, but also making sure you're aligning capacity for supporting the individuals who are using the tools with the deployment of those tools. So not just like free for all rolling out a system and expecting everyone to figure out how to use it on their own. And then thinking about how you might identify 1 to 2 pilots that would match your capacity and data reality. And these are all kind of our next steps and underway tasks that we are in the works with at ACCS. And I didn't get into the weeds on what we found in our research. We tried to cover a bit of that in our last session, but a lot of this is informed by what has happened at the institutions that we've seen in that transforming category already. And so we want to think about incremental, realistically priced steps that you can take to continue to move forward. Always important to warrants a note here. We want to call out that as you scale your tools, it's important to make sure that your governance and your capacity, so like not only your budget capacity, but also your training capacity, your ability like for your team members to carve out hours in their days to think about how to use these tools is just as important as rolling out licenses for these platforms. And we want to ensure that if you, especially at resource constrained and moderately resourced institutions, if you are working with a limited budget, that you are not potentially wasting that budget by rolling out a tool faster than your governance and capacity can keep up. We understand that there is this urgency and this real like desire to move forward around AI that is so warranted and valid, but also there's a real risk of money left on the table for licenses that go unused if institutions do not kind of make sure that their governance and capacity are moving in lockstep with their technology deployment. And so, with that, we want to encourage you to think about those next steps. Like I said, would hope that you will take the time to bring this rubric back to your teams and have a discussion. Think about if you're going to be able to roll out the survey and what that might look like for you at your campus. And then commit to 1 to 3 readiness moves or next steps that you can take to really put these findings from this work into action. Um, I study initiative fatigue, and I realize that I am piling on even more. And so, want to just remind you that you don't have to do everything at once, even though the call right now is urgent to adopt AI. Doing this well and doing this right one time rather than doing it in a rushed nature and then having to redo it later is worth it, in my opinion. So I want to open it up for questions. I'm going to do a quick shout out to make sure that folks are aware of the rest of our webinar series. And if Daniel, you can drop the link in the chat. We have our next webinar scheduled on April 21st. We're going to be joined by a panel to talk about different ways that they're approaching training around AI on their campuses. One of our biggest takeaways from this study was that staff training has been grossly overlooked at our institutions. And so, really excited to dig into this topic next month. But now I want to open it up for any questions that folks might have for myself or for Mo. And so, if you'd like to drop any questions into the chat, we would welcome that.
And just because folks have had a bit of trouble sharing the chat, Stephanie on T3 support and I can keep an eye out and make sure all questions get answered.
Curious to hear if folks have any questions they would drop in the chat.
Audrey, while we wait, one question that I'm starting to hear for folks who are listening, and I'm relatively new to T3. So something that I'm starting to hear as I review our research is people really wondering where to get started. So when they find themselves at the early curve of the adoption readiness rubric, I'm like, what do you tend to think are like those 1 to 3 moves that you've seen work well at other institutions? Our low-hanging
Yeah.
fruit, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. If you are early on the readiness spectrum, I think going to that envision first step is a really powerful exercise. So it's something that we're actually currently doing with the presidents at ACCS. Not to suggest that they are early, but just to suggest it's an exercise that can be really impactful. So we are doing an exercise where we ask just a couple of questions of a large stakeholder group, and we're saying if AI adoption and integration at your insert system, institution, etc., is wildly successful in the next 3 to 5 years, what problem did we solve? Or asking perhaps, what is absolutely required to make sure that we are successful with AI adoption and taking the time to create a shared conversation around AI um, that isn't going to kind of potentially get stymied by um, conversations around the challenges that AI presents is a really powerful exercise. And if I can make a plug, our team member Geneva is actually publishing a blog on Thursday about a similar topic, which is about how to, and I don't want to steal any of her thunder, but I would encourage folks to look out for it because it's really about how to get kind of prepare and anticipate some of the common pushback that folks like to bring up during these conversations. And I see Geneva came on camera for this. Do you want to say a word about this blog that you're writing?
Sure. Thanks, Audrey, and good afternoon, everyone. So grateful that you took your time out of your day to be a part of today's conversation. So yeah, as Audrey mentioned, I'll be posting a blog post on both our LinkedIn as well as the T3 site related to a presentation that I attended while I was at the ATD Dream Conference a few weeks ago, where two senior leaders at community colleges were discussing what their experience has been with adopting AI on their campuses, and then how they've been able to articulate such initiatives within their campus environments. And based on a question from the audience around how we navigate and manage that duality of, supporting our institutions, supporting our students, but also acknowledging the fact that there are some environmental implications that we need to also keep front of mind when we're engaging with generative AI and AI technologies across, technology more broadly speaking. So I'll be publishing an article that relates to how folks should consider how they engage with folks that are may be considered skeptics and how to continue to move the momentum forward, even though we have to consider all of those different perspectives. So stay tuned for
Yeah,
that.
Audrey, I have one more question.
sure.
So when we think about the pace of change, right? I think a lot of folks right now are talking about developing policy, and that was like such a common theme in the chat. I know not everybody was able to see it, but in addition to coordination, policy was the number one issue that folks were addressing on their spectrum. And it's really interesting because we're talking about developing AI policy and guidance on that pretty regularly right now. Um, because your experience and expertise is in change fatigue, how are you suggesting people go about doing this on campus when you have day-to-days with folks like Mo? And Mo, not to put you on the spot, but if you've got thoughts on that, I'd be curious too.
Yes. So change fatigue at in this moment, how are we navigating
Around
introducing,
AI policy
yeah,
development specifically. Yeah.
policy development? Yeah. I mean, I think that there's got to be nothing more frustrating than spending a year writing a policy that ends up being irrelevant by the time it gets approved by your board. So I would argue that we need to be intentional about what we're asking our team to do and the feasibility of it and being open to the reality and not just the ideal. And sure, in an ideal state, we would write a really robust policy, maybe. But in this moment that we live in, we know that it takes a long time to run a policy up the flagpole, get it approved, and then get it, get everyone educated and trained on it. And AI does not take a long time to change. And so, that just being an example, policy wise, I would say before you ask, let's say, a task force to write the policy, I would encourage you to think about perhaps a differently productive, I'll frame it as, task that they might undertake, which might be more of a visioning exercise, or a assessment like we're talking about today of where the institution stands. And if a policy is a must, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying consider consolidating that to a couple of people who own that task because the last thing you want is the 10 or 15 champions that are on that task force to be assigned with a task that ends up being irrelevant by the time it goes live. And that could really, I think, affect your morale on campus and that sense of fatigue, which I think with the rate of change with AI, some of it is inevitable, but some of it can potentially be avoided.
And
Thank you.
to add, Danielle, to what Adri mentioned, to get the policy reviewed, approved by the different groups, it takes like, if it's not 6 months minimum to a year. So what we end up doing, we came up with a policy that two paragraphs saying that the chancellor is authorized or charged with developing procedures, and the chancellor is authorized to attain the resources needed to implement those procedures. And that's the whole policy. And that's the only thing that require approval through that hierarchy that take years. And because the timing that it change, by the time we get a policy approved, it's not really, we need to change again or it need to be updated. But the procedure, we can update it without having to go through that hierarchy. So we will be more um, up with the change as it happened. We can update our procedures.
Yeah, that's great
That's
to
what
hear,
we
Mo.
end up doing at the system office.
Yeah, I feel like that agility is really key here, and it's the thing that I hear a lot about too. So it's a nice way you've approached it for sure. Thank you.
And I guess I would also just add like policy, how do I want to put this? For institutional leaders and stakeholders who are um, spread really thin, there is a I think there's an often unacknowledged impact of constrictive, like top-down policy. And so, what I think is really exciting about these guidelines that are in tandem with the policy Mo's talking about is that so they're rolling out this one sentence, basically, or couple sentence policy that gives them that agility in tandem with guidelines that can go through a much faster iterative ongoing process that gives folks a sense of empowerment to be creative and be mindful about what AI could mean for them within guardrails and taking still a safe approach. It's not like I think a lot of people often feel that an entire AI policy is warranted because generative AI feels so new, but it's not like our institutions are operating without information security policies and other types of compliance policies that actually do provide substantial protection for what might also be included in an AI policy. And the AI policy, what people put in that content is often more in the nature of guidelines or academic integrity. And so in this case, we've been able, I think, to give individuals a little bit more room to experiment. And I see that we're almost at time. There's one question, and I'm going to try to cover that briefly. And before we wrap, I just want to really encourage folks to join us at our next webinar. But this question is about timing and managing expectations for during high engagement seasons for stakeholders. Since we're nearing the end of the semester and graduation season, how do champions maintain momentum during these times? That's a really great question. And no doubt, like we are approaching finals period, most faculty not being on contract during the summer. And so I think that if there's a way to roll out on your campus, if you have not conducted some sort of assessment like the rubric or the surveys, if there's a way to sneak that in before the end of the semester, I think that could be great because you're not asking for much. You're just asking for, a max 10-minute survey submission, which would then buy you time to actually use the summer to reflect on what you are learning from that survey and to really kind of create a plan to then spring into action. Um, that being said, I think that it's there's probably a lot on your plates already on campus, and any time can be a good time to roll this out. I would probably say from a faculty standpoint, I'd wait until the fall if you're not going to get it done in the spring. But I think that keeping momentum for champions throughout that time period and throughout the summer can look like communities of practice or working groups or lunch and learns where folks can continue to iterate and experiment with one another. And that's another tactic that can work really well and which we'll share more about in our webinar next month. So I just want to thank everyone for joining. Want to be respectful of your time. Really appreciate everyone who participated in the chat and who listened. I hope you'll take a chance to peruse our resources and toolkits. Reach out if you have any questions. Looking forward to continuing the conversation and have a great rest of your day.
Thank
And
you.
happy St. Patrick's Day. I wore my green today.